This guide covers all the actions the Bard learns from level 51 to 90 in order. We go over how each action is meant to be used and recommend ways to use it when relevant. We also summarize the changes in the combat rotation at level 60, 70 and 80. In the final summary, we outline an optimized opener and explain how it leads into the general rotation alongside 2-minute burst considerations. We also touch on the stat priorities of the Bard. I will assume you already know the basics of Bard from level 1 to 50, and if not, you can view my Bard starter guide to get caught up. I will also assume you are acquainted with common abbreviations like GCD, OGCD and weaving. And if these abbreviations are unfamiliar to you, I have a short describing GCDs and OGCDs and a short describing weaving. Now then, at level 52, you learn the ability Wanderer's Minuet, a third song to work alongside Mage's Ballad and Army's Paean. Wanderer's Minuet boosts the critical hit rate of your party by 2% while it is in effect. You also learn the ability Pitch Perfect, which is useless on its own. Wanderer's Minuet is replaced by Pitch Perfect for the duration of the song. Whenever Repertoire activates with Wanderer's Minuet, you gain a stack of Repertoire, up to 3, and when you have at least 1 stack of this effect, you can use Pitch Perfect to spend all of them. More stacks mean increasingly more damage. Whenever you have 3 stacks, weave Pitch Perfect on your next opportunity. If the duration of Wanderer's Minuet is below 3 seconds, no more repertoire procs will happen before the song ends, so make sure to use Pitch Perfect to spend any remaining stacks at that point. Pitch Perfect makes Wanderer's Minuet the strongest of the 3 songs for single target, and so you should pair all your big cooldowns with Wanderer's Minuet. This means Raging Strikes, Barrage and Battle Voice. After that, use Mage's Ballad and then finish off with Army's Paean. Naturally, durations of 45 seconds and cooldowns of 120 seconds mean that to loop this system perfectly, you need to end at least 1 song early. It is recommended that you stay in Wanderer's Minuet for at least 43 seconds, just long enough to pitch perfect that last stack you might get. Mage's Ballad for only 34 seconds, again, just long enough to have the opportunity to get a proc, and also 43 seconds for Army's Paean. The most important part here is that Wanderer's Minuet should last as long as possible and always be used alongside your other 2-minute cooldowns. So, you have a lot of wiggle room with Mage's Ballad and Army's Paean to learn with. Even if Mage's Ballad is stronger on AoE than Wanderer's Minuet, it is highly recommended that you use your cooldowns during Wanderer's Minuet anyway, as it is nearly impossible to adjust the cooldown timings throughout a dungeon. At level 54, you learn the ability Empyreal Arrow, which is an OGCD-like bloodletter that you use on cooldown. Since it does not have a charge system, it should take priority over bloodletter. At level 56, you learn the weapon skill Iron Jaws, which in addition to doing some damage, refreshes the duration of your dots, but only if they are already up. It should be noted that functionally, Iron Jaws replaces the dots, so if you have any damage buffs up while using it, this is applied. With this weapon skill, under most circumstances, you would apply your dots at the start of a fight and then use Iron Jaws to reapply them throughout the fight. Always make sure to use Iron Jaws to apply your dots when you can. At level 60, you learn the ability Sidewinder, which is yet another OGCD, although this one is on a minute-long cooldown. In an opener context, you can delay Sidewinder until after Empyreal Arrow and the first charge of Bloodletter, as the long cooldown of Sidewinder means that less is lost by delaying it. Every other minute, make sure to use Sidewinder while affected by Raging Strikes and Battle Voice to make the most of it. Since level 50, Wanderer's Minuet is introduced as the new strongest song of choice. Sidewinder and Empyreal Arrow are also introduced as more OGCD attacks to use alongside Bloodletter. Finally, Iron Jaws makes it much easier to keep your dots up on a target as soon as they have been applied at the start. To incorporate all these new toys, you can adjust your opener as follows. Start with Windbite and weave Wanderer's Minuet and then Raging Strikes. Then apply Venomous Bite, weaving Empyreal Arrow and Bloodletter. Then use Heavy Shot, weaving Battle Voice, and if you don't have Straight Shot ready, weave Barrage. If you do have Straight Shot ready, instead weave Sidewinder. Then use Straight Shot and then weave Sidewinder or Barrage depending on what you did before, and if you just weave Barrage, use Straight Shot again. After this, continue your rotation as always, cycling through Wanderer's Minuet, then Mage's Ballad, and then Army's Paean, taking note to start Wanderer's Minuet with all the big cooldowns. Make sure to use Pitch Perfect at 3 stacks whenever possible. At level 62, you learn the ability Troubadour, which is a raid-wide defensive cooldown, reducing damage taken for everyone. Whenever you expect raid-wide damage incoming, use this. You can also use it if the tank is taking a heavy beating to help them out. At level 64, Venomous Bite and Wind Bite permanently upgrade to Caustic Bite and Stormbite respectively. On 2 targets, they are both better than Quick Knock if they last 15 seconds. On 3 targets, they need to last 30 seconds. I recommend applying Stormbite, then Caustic Bite, while the tank is pulling and you cannot reliably hit 3 targets with Quick Knock, and then just resort to Quick Knock once you can hit the entire pack. At level 66, you learn the ability Nature's Min, which increases the healing received by you and your party. This can be helpful to use to help your healer to recover after raid-wide damage. In solo play, it is mainly helpful to increase the healing of Second Wind. At level 68, Empyreal Arrow is upgraded to instantly activate repertoire for your current song whenever it is used. This makes it much more valuable to use as often as you can. When done perfectly, you should seek to always have 3 Empyreal Arrows during Wanderer's Minuet and 2 in both Mage's Ballad and Army's Paean. Given that there will be 8 Empyreal Arrows at most in 2 minutes, there is likely a 3rd arrow in either Mage's Ballad or Army's Paean, but which one gets this one is less significant. If you are going to weave Empyreal Arrow on the next GCD and you have 2 repertoire stacks in Wanderer's Minuet, use Pitch Perfect here, to make sure you don't risk wasting a repertoire stack from the regular timer and Empyreal Arrow overlapping. At level 70, your straight shot is permanently upgraded to Refulgent Arrow, massively increasing its potency. This does not change your rotation, but it does mean that if you somehow have the opportunity to use Refulgent Arrow on 2 targets, it is better than Quick Knock. Barrage Refulgent Arrow is better than Quick Knock on up to 7 targets, after which Quick Knock takes over again. Since level 60, you have learned a bunch of utility and gotten some potency boosts. Overall, your opener and rotation is completely unchanged, but you should try to make sure Empyreal Arrow is used 3 times in every Wanderer's Minuet. This should happen naturally by using it generally on cooldown to get as many repertoire procs out of it as possible. At level 72, you learn the weapon skill Shadow Bite. Quick Knock also gains a 35% chance on use to proc Shadow Bite ready, which enables Shadow Bite, which should be used in place of Quick Knock whenever possible. Take note that while Quick Knock is a frontal cone attack, Shadow Bite is a circle AoE centered on your target. Additionally, Barrage is upgraded to have an alternative use case. If you use Shadow Bite with Barrage active, it does much more damage, and of course consumes the buff. Keep in mind that Barrage does not grant the Shadow Bite ready buff, so on AoE, make sure to use Barrage when you have the proc instead of using it on Refulgent Arrow. Quick Knock and Shadow Bite is better on 2 targets than Heavy Shot and Refulgent Arrow. On 2 or 3 targets, it is better to spend Barrage on Refulgent Arrow, but on 4 or more targets, Barrage should be spent on Shadow Bite. At level 76, Heavy Shot permanently upgrades to Burst Shot, increasing its potency as well as increasing its chance to enable Refulgent Arrow to 35%. You also gain the trait Bite Mastery 2, which makes Stormbite, Caustic Bite and Iron Jaws each also have the same 35% chance to enable Refulgent Arrow. None of these things change your rotation, and you should prioritize applying Stormbite and Caustic Bite over spending Refulgent Arrow at the start of a fight. And while you can plan around it, Iron Jaws should be more important than using Refulgent Arrow, as reversing the order sometimes can cause your dots to drop, which should be avoided. If you plan around reapplying your dots when they reach a duration of 5 seconds, you can always fit both Refulgent Arrow and Iron Jaws, in whichever order you need. At level 78, Army's Paean is expanded with Army's Muse and Army's Ethos. If Army's Paean runs out naturally, you are granted Army's Ethos, which gives you up to 30 seconds to activate Army's Muse. Army's Muse activates when you play either Wanderer's Minuet or Mage's Ballad, while Army's Paean or Army's Ethos is active, and means the first 10 seconds of either song brings 75% of Army's Paean's effect in with it. This is the reason why we always use Army's Paean last in the order, because this means that Army's Paean automatically leads into Wanderer's Minuet, which is the strongest of the songs, and so where you will use all your cooldowns anyway. If you followed the song order and timing mentioned near the start of the guide, then this changes nothing for your rotation. except that you should always late weave Wanderer's Minuet to fit as many GCDs in the army's Muse window as possible. Just as a reminder, this order I mentioned is 43 seconds of Wanderer's Minuet, 34 seconds of Mage's Ballad, and 43 seconds of Army's Paean, approximately of course. At level 80, you unlock the Soul Voice gauge. Every time Repertoire activates, either automatically or by Empyreal Arrow, you gain 5 Soul Voice gauge, up to a maximum of 100. You also learn the weapon skill Apex Arrow, which, while it only costs 20 Soul Voice gauge to use, should preferably only be used at 80 or more. Starting at 100 potency in a line AoE, this attack gradually increases in potency up to 500 at 100 Soul Voice gauge. This means that at 80 it does 400 potency. Over 2 minutes, you should typically be able to expect to gain between 160 and 200 Soul Voice gauge. If you use Apex Arrow somewhere in the middle of Mage's Ballad, when Wanderer's Minuet has around 60 seconds left on its cooldown, you should have another Apex Arrow for when all your damage boosting cooldowns are ready. If you have used this Mage's Ballad Apex Arrow and then reach 100 Soul Voice gauge before Wanderer's Minuet, I recommend just waiting for your cooldowns and using it alongside them. Since level 70, you have gotten a lot more opportunities to proc Refulgent Arrow, and Quick Knock now has an AoE version of this proc too, in Shadow Bite. Barrage can be spent on Shadow Bite for extra damage and should be done on AoE. Army's Paean was also improved to grant some of its effect to the song that immediately follows it. All this does not change much about your rotation aside from making it more reliable, but you also got a new gauge. Apex Arrow should be used around once every minute, and this means once during Mage's Ballad and once around the start of Wanderer's Minuet, during your damage buffs. But due to the fact that the Soul Voice gauge increases based on repertoire procs, which is somewhat random, the main idea is to make sure that you only use Apex Arrow with at least 80 Soul Voice gauge. At level 82, Quick Knock permanently upgrades to Ladon's Bite, boosting its potency but otherwise changing nothing about your rotation. At level 84, Bloodletter and Rain of Death now can hold 3 charges. This also does not change your rotation. I do recommend considering stockpiling 1 or 2 charges when Wanderer's Minuet is about to come up, to get some extra damage in the damage buffs. At level 86, whenever you use Apex Arrow with at least 80 Soul Voice gauge, it turns into the weapon skill Blast Arrow, which you should always follow up with afterwards. This is the main reason why it is crucially important Apex Arrow is always used with at least 80 Soul Voice gauge. Take note that the potency of Blast Arrow is not affected by how much Soul Voice gauge you spend on Apex Arrow. And also that while Blast Arrow is also a line AoE, it does the vast majority of its damage to the first target in the line. Also take note that you can fill other weapon skills between the 2 casts, as Blast Arrow is accessed with the Blast Arrow Ready buff, not as a combo action. At level 88, Troubadour's cooldown is reduced, which does not change much for you. At level 90, your gauge is expanded with the Coda markers, and you learn the ability Radiant Finale. When any of your 3 songs are cast, you are given a coda corresponding to that one song. Then, when Radiant Finale is cast, it grants you and your party a damage boost for a bit depending on how many different coda you had. In your opener, you should use Radiant Finale with just 1 coda alongside Battle Voice. Then every subsequent Radiant Finale should be again used alongside Battle Voice, as you will gain the Wanderer's Minuet coda for it at this time, as long as you keep the 2-minute cooldown timing consistent. To round off, let's first talk about an opener followed by general rotation, as well as how this works with the 2-minute burst. And finally, let's briefly touch on stat priorities on gear. Let's begin. If you intend to use a tincture, a so-called burst potion, use it 1.5 seconds before combat starts. Then open with Stormbite, weaving Wanderer's Minuet and Raging Strikes. Then Caustic Bite, weaving Empyreal Arrow and Bloodletter. Then use Refulgent Arrow if you have a proc, Burst Shot if not, and weave Radiant Finale and Battle Voice. Then another Refulgent Arrow or Burst Shot, and then weave Barrage if you didn't get another Refulgent Arrow proc, Sidewinder if you did. Also, weave Pitch Perfect if you have 3 stacks, otherwise weave Bloodletter. Then use Refulgent Arrow and weave the other OGCD you didn't use between Barrage and Sidewinder, as well as 3-stack Pitch Perfect or Bloodletter. After that, do 3 more Refulgent Arrows or Burst Shots, weaving 3-stack Pitch Perfect or Bloodletter if they are available, and then weave Empyreal Arrow when it is available. followed by refreshing your dots with Iron Jaws before your buffs end. This then leads to the general rotation. Your song sequence is optimally 43 seconds of Wanderer's Minuet, then 34 seconds of Mage's Ballad, and then 43 seconds of Army's Paean. You can also adjust the plan and timing of some of these songs around the specific encounter for further optimization. The important part is that Wanderer's Minuet should last as long as possible, Army's Paean should get 4 stacks before you switch to Wanderer's Minuet, and, of course, the full combined duration of your 3 songs should always add up to 120 seconds. If you have some expected downtime somehow in an encounter, then it may be beneficial if you can plan Mage's Ballad around it by, for example, ending Wanderer's Minuet early and then staying in Mage's Ballad longer to compensate. This can, for example, be helpful when a boss leaves. You can also enter Army's Paean as the downtime begins, if it means you can open with your prepared burst after the boss returns. Use Burst Shot and Refulgent Arrow as fillers between other actions. Make sure to use Iron Jaws in good time so your dots don't fall off. I recommend refreshing when the dots are at around 5 seconds left. Bloodletter should be weaved at any good opportunity. After Mage's Ballad, you can let Bloodletter charges stockpile in preparation for your burst with Wanderer's Minuet. Empyreal Arrow should always be used on cooldown, and if you have 2 stacks of repertoire during Wanderer's Minuet, I recommend that you use Pitch Perfect just before Empyreal Arrow becomes ready, so that you don't need to risk both getting a natural proc and an Empyreal proc in the same instant and thus losing one. Sidewinder should also be used on cooldown, but it can be postponed to make space for Empyreal Arrow if this is somehow necessary. You can expect to get around 2 Apex Arrows at 80 or more Soul Voice gauge in 2 minutes. This suggests that if you plan Apex Arrow around the time you would use Sidewinder, you should be doing pretty good. Another way to keep track is to use it when Mage's Ballad's duration is around halfway through. Following the general song rotation, you should use Apex Arrow around the middle of Mage's Ballad, assuming you have at least 80 gauge. This of course leads to the immediate Blast Arrow follow-up. Assuming everything is used correctly, you can expect nearly every button on your bars to light up at the 2-minute burst. Naturally, you want to use everything. Due to the many random factors in the Bard rotation, this can vary slightly, but let's go over the general idea of the Bard 2-minute burst. Assuming you enter the burst window with plenty of duration on your dots, the main idea is that you enter with a late weaved Wanderer's Minuet and weave Raging Strikes on the follow-up GCD. 2 GCDs later, you use Radiant Finale and Battle Voice, filling with Burst Shot, Refulgent Arrow and potentially Iron Jaws if you need it. Once your buffs are up, use Apex Arrow, then Blast Arrow, and then find an opportunity to use Barrage Refulgent Arrow without wasting an existing Refulgent Arrow proc. Note that you can weave Barrage between Apex Arrow and Blast Arrow and then make use of the buff afterwards if you like. After that, you fill with Burst Shot and Refulgent Arrows until the very last GCD before your buffs run out, where you use Iron Jaws to maximize the duration where your dots benefit from the damage increasing buffs. Between all this, you should weave Empyreal Arrow, 3-stack Pitch Perfect, Sidewinder and Bloodletter OGCDs in that order, wherever there is space for it. You should not delay any of these to fit within your buff specifically, although you can stockpile 2 Bloodletter stacks if you like. Finally, regarding stat priorities, take note that in nearly every single case, item level beats out optimal secondary stats. This means you should always prioritize gear with higher item level as long as it has dexterity on it. After that, Bard's stat priority is critical hit, then determination and directed, and finally skill speed. Determination and directed are almost identical in value, with determination being a tiny bit better, so given the choice between the two, it should be preferred. Bard does have a preferred skill speed value. If you can get your GCD around 248 or 247, then this tends to make your song timings as well as Empyreal Arrow flow a little nicer. Overall though, skill speed is not at all an important stat to optimize around for Bard. Now, that is all for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to support me and my channel, you can like the video, leave a comment, subscribe and hit the bell to get notified when next I post a video. And if you want to give even more support than that, you can also become a member of the channel. Fun fact, Mage's Ballad is considered the weakest of the 3 songs, but is placed second in the song order for 2 different reasons. The first one is of course that it is the only way to make armies pay on land before Wanderer's Minuet for the army's Muse buff for your burst window. The second reason is that the 1% damage bonus to the party from Mage's Ballad is the strongest of the 3 party buffs, and placing it second in the order means that it overlaps with 1-minute bursts for everyone else. This is of course more an on the side kind of bonus, but it is still something.